There's an interesting facet to human psychology, which suggests that you only really are bothered by things if you're aware of them, right? And the online world that we live in has completely changed the landscape across the board in every respect in terms of what we're aware of. If something were to happen in Indonesia right now, we would all know instantly, within a few minutes of its occurring. That was not the case 40 years ago. It took a little while for these things to get around. And that's particularly true when it comes to things like wealth disparity, success, and so on and so forth. And the online world is particularly pernicious in this regard because, as we know, there are a lot of these gurus online that are peddling all sorts of programs and telling you how to be successful. The vast, vast majority of them are disingenuous and not really offering sincere help. And this is because we become hyper aware of our differences in terms of our status. Now imagine growing up in some town in Idaho in the 50s. You would not have been aware of most of these things. Yes, in the 50s there were millionaires in Hollywood and New York and whatever, but you wouldn't have known very much about that. You would have been content with your relatively isolated existence in this town in Idaho. This is no longer the case. And so it's an interesting observation to make that many people are not actually bothered by their quote-unquote state of loserdom or their lack of money or resources, as much as they're bothered by the fact that there's somebody out there, indeed potentially many people out there, who have these resources and have lots of money and, for example, are not quote-unquote losers. And this has been something that's been observed in psychology time and again, also in sociology. For example, wealth disparity. People aren't really bothered by necessarily making less money than other people as long as they're not hyper aware of that. If it's being shoved in your face nonstop, and that's what the internet is basically, then you're going to be much more aware of these things, and it's going to bother you that much more. As the great and wise P.D. the Punani Slayer likes to say, comparison is the thief of joy, and yet, almost paradoxically, in order to ascertain your station in life, you kind of need to compare. And so probably the best thing to do is some kind of healthy, happy medium, right? But the online world does not permit that. You tend to see the best of the best, the people who are most successful, and you see a lot of filtered images as well as a lot of BS. For example, bathrobe men are not leveling entirely in terms of their success, what they do with their money, etc., etc. And so effectively, we've all been driven a bit mad by the online world, and people, especially young people, especially young men, are struggling with a sense of lack of self-esteem, a sense of lack of achievement, because the only model being proposed to them is this online model, which tends to be artificial, a bit unreal, and oftentimes hyperbolic. And the reason I've been having thoughts on this, particularly recently, is because of a conversation I partook in not too long ago about this guy, Dr. K. You know, he's that guy who runs Healthy Gamer, that Indian psychiatrist. And he has this channel. It's basically a business. He has these coaches that he employs that do sessions, and the sessions are pretty expensive. But there was this one guy who was really angry at Dr. K because basically he was depressed and angry at Dr. K that Dr. K doesn't really care about the people that he claims to care about. And there was another guy arguing with him saying, well, no, he does. And he was kind of idolizing Dr. K and saying what a good person he was. And I was there kind of in the middle just listening and thinking, well, I don't care about Dr. K one way or another, but if I had to take a position, it would be pretty neutral. I don't really have an intense feeling of negativity or positivity towards Dr. K. But the crux of the matter was that this one guy who was very depressed and upset about his wagey job was saying that Dr. K doesn't want to level with his audience. He doesn't want to say, look, you're not going to be rich like I am. Most of you are not going to be super successful. Many of you are going to struggle until you die, that sort of thing. And the guy was idealizing and was saying quite the opposite. Well, that's not his job. He's not supposed to do that. He's really helpful. He encourages people. And you notice that there's a tension there. Because part of it is just grift, let's be honest. You don't tell things to the people you want to make money off of if they're negative, right? You're not going to tell your audience, even if you really think this, well, a lot of you won't make it. A lot of you are really struggling, and that's just going to be your permanent state of being. You're just going to struggle, especially if you're already successful. Because, say, what Dr. K likes to do is kind of create this sense of familiarity. He used to be this gamer. He's only in his early 40s, and so he can relate. Healthy Gamer, that's the name of the channel, right? So he's relating to all these Zoomers and young millennials. So there's that aspect. And there's also the aspect potentially that it could be damaging. You don't want to discourage people, setting aside whether or not Dr. K actually cares. You don't want to discourage people necessarily. So if you tell them you're probably not going to be a millionaire, you're probably not going to be super successful, that might not work with them particularly well either. Now, I want to tie this into what I was talking about in the beginning, namely the sense of comparison, this hyper-awareness of other people's success and what have you, because some fallout from this, a very important piece of fallout that I think is very damaging to people generally, their sense of self, self-esteem, psychological well-being, and is related to this notion of winners and losers, is there is a growing consensus that if you don't achieve X in life, then A, you're a loser, and B, you are a failure, which is to say there's something fundamentally wrong with you if you're not a multimillionaire, Giga Chad, whatever. That's a bit hyperbolic, but if you're not ultra successful, you don't have a lot of money, you're not running some kind of business, if you're doing something else, there might be something wrong with you. And you're made to feel a certain way, especially as a young person. You have no idea, especially if you're older, what it's like in today's day and age to be a young person. I can't really grasp it either, but I saw a video, for example, of a 16 or 17-year-old who had been suckered into paying hundreds of dollars per month to Hamza for some kind of set of courses that turned out to be bunk and BS. But more broadly, that's the message that is communicated with these people. Oh, you're not like me? Well, you're a loser. Even if they're not explicitly stating that. And this is where this notion of being frank and honest about winners and losers is probably a good thing. That's a conversation that needs to be had with all its subtlety, which is to say, life ultimately is about winners and losers, and you can definitely lose big time, really big time, and very few people win big time. And of course, there's a lot of variation in between. There's some people that kind of win and some people that kind of lose. But part of this is also perceptual, in the sense that, in theory, if you could take as an individual your life now and transpose it back to the past, say to that sleepy town in Idaho, maybe you wouldn't feel that bad. Probably not. You might have a decent job that you kind of like. You might have friends you get along with. You might be in a state that's okay for the most part. And your sense of not being okay is predicated on being constantly assaulted and assailed by the online advertisement of, well, compared to these multimillionaire whatever people, I'm a loser. This is especially true of younger people and younger guys, because they're just very vulnerable to this sort of thing. It is true that life is about winners and losers, for sure. But that is a very generalized way of looking at it. And if you're living in your own little content bubble, hypothetically, it doesn't matter if Bathroom Man is making tons of money, or if Dr. K is a scam artist or not, and he's a multimillionaire, which he probably is. That doesn't really matter, because you're just doing your own thing. It's only when you've been limbically hijacked, so to speak, by the online world to believe in these extremes. For example, that you have to be a famous multimillionaire in order to be successful in life, in the sense of being content, in the sense of feeling fulfilled. Well, that's probably not true either, even though I fully acknowledge that ultimately life comes down to winners and losers and every iteration and variation in between. And ultimately, this does reinforce my belief that, for the most part, the online environment is quote-unquote toxic, damaging, negative, that the internet has been worse than it has been better. And you as a young person, especially as a young man, should be aware of this. your fate may or may not be yet written, but using the greatest extremes of anything as a benchmark, and I can say this from personal experience, will surely make you miserable. As always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons and donors on PayPal. You keep the channel alive. You keep it going. Without you, all would be dust and ash. As for everybody else, if you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, I heard that helps out the channel. It'd be much appreciated. Until the next time, if I'm still alive, I'll check you out then. May the gods watch over you. Goodbye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.